Hi everyone, I'm Sofia Ox from Italy and I'm here with my colleague
Tijn Venede from the Netherlands.
We are both students of the Creativity and Design course here in IULM, and we are here today to attend the IULM FLOW with the Olivetti Leadership Institute, or for short, OLI. And as we know, OLI is the first school entirely dedicated in Italy for the study and practice of leadership. And I will now present a small presentation I've created. We view leadership as a practice that can be learned and that it's necessary in order to progress in the complex world of change. This quote can be found on the OLI website and tells us the insight behind the creation of the Institute. That is why they work with NGOs, students, women, public officials, and citizens in order to help them grow their leadership skills and to tackle the most pressing challenges they have to face in their life. The name of the course comes from Adriano Olivetti, which was the founder of the company in the 1950s. And today I wanted to thank our guest, Dr. Stefano Zordan, who is the co-founder of OLI, for joining us today. Today's topic comes from the core of the Institute, and it takes the title of Emerging Leadership Between Creativity and Design. I now leave the floor to Stefano. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, guys, for this kind presentation and for having me with you today. It's an honor and a pleasure. So if we can have my presentation up. Thank you so much. Okay, so here we are. This topic of leadership, which has become a very important part of my life, what I do. And so I want to share with you a little bit of about us and a little bit about the philosophy behind our work and the practice that we conduct daily around the topic of leadership. Let me see. Okay, I want to start with a problem, quite a big problem. The problem we have here is that leadership is a very tricky word. Leadership means everything and the opposite of everything. You know, already in 1974, a scholar of leadership wrote, "There are almost as many definitions of leadership as there are authors who have written about it." And that was in 1974. You can imagine what happened since. Okay, so we enter a very slippery territory when we talk about leadership. You can talk to anybody on the street. You can talk to professors. You can talk to your parents. They all have a definition of leadership ready to give to you. Okay, so it's important that we clarify that before we start. Leadership is not considered a discipline yet. It's an area of study. So that creates a lot of confusion, a plurality of definitions. Okay, and that is a problem in itself. Okay. So when we enter the territory of leadership, we need to keep that in mind and be very careful, okay? But at the same time, this kind of openness gives us a lot of, room for creativity. The responsibility to choose the right words to talk about leadership is on us, each of us, okay? So that's a little preamble that I wanted to share with you, okay? So leadership not as a discipline, like I don't know, like physics, okay, but as an area of study and practice. So careful when we enter the territory of leadership. So I come from a classical background. I studied Latin and Greek a lot, as some people do in Italy back in high school, and so I'm a bit obsessed with etymologies. It's a good source to look at when we want some clarity on something. And so if you do that with the word leadership, here you are, okay? If you look up the word leadership, leader, the verb to lead, you find at the very root of the word, you find those four little letters, late, L-E-I-T. And if you look up the definitions of that, you find those two things: to go forth, to go before, okay, to precede, to be in front of a group of people, okay, And, so far so good. I mean, we kind of expected that. The second definition is a bit more problematic: to die. Clearly, the origin of that is military. Okay, we can understand that quite easily. If you are in front of a group, you are closer to the enemy. Okay, you are closer to the fight line. You have more chances to die than the people coming behind you. Okay, so already in that etymology, we see the element of risk that is connaturated, that is linked to the idea of leadership. Okay, so keep that in mind. Whoever talks about leadership as something easy is telling us a lie, is lying to us. Okay, leadership is necessarily connected to an idea of risk. Without risk, there's no leadership. Without danger, there's no leadership. I know that I would have liked to start in a softer way, but I since we don't have a lot of time together, I really want you to focus on the core of the message here. So leadership is a difficult activity. It has a risky element to it, a risky component. Okay. I said a moment ago that a lot of things have been written about leadership. Okay, so we need to make some clarity while we navigate through these things. Okay, recently there's a new literature on leadership in the last 20 years that has been very critical of most of the things that have been written about leadership in the past. Okay, in the past, up until 20 years ago, most of the things said about leadership were very personalistic. Leadership was presented as a trait of the individual, as an individual trait, as a characteristic of an individual, a characteristic that you were born with. Okay, some of us were born with the leadership trait, and the majority of people were not. Okay, so humanity was divided in two. An elite that we could call leaders, and the rest, the mass of people, followers. Okay, this idea comes from the past, but is still very strong in the present. Okay, but this idea has given us problems, a lot of problems. Okay, the idea of a visionary leader that can lead a group towards a better future has produced a lot of problems throughout history, and still does to this very day. So in the last 20 years, a lot of scholars, a lot of literature has started to criticize this very personalistic idea of leadership. Okay, so there are new views of leadership that we can call collective models of leadership. So leadership is going from being a trait of the person, a trait of the individual, to being something produced by a community, something diffused in a community. The more people exercise leadership, the better off is that community. Okay, so leadership is the project of a community work. Okay, so leadership goes from being the property of somebody, the property of an individual, the property of somebody who is better than you, somebody who is more powerful than you, somebody who knows more than you, to being a practice. Okay, a practice that can be cultivated, that can be learned, that can be lost and regained. Okay, a practice that can be taught. Okay, so you see the shift. It's a pretty big shift. And that shift is not complete yet. There's, I see some sort of a battle going on between these two very different models of leadership. To this very day. In 2023. There's still a lot of people who think that leadership is something you are born with, okay? And there are increasingly more people who think that leadership is something that you can cultivate, that anybody can cultivate. A teenager, a top manager, a politician, a public servant, a woman, a man, a young person, an old person, right? So we are in a very interesting moment in academia, but also in the practical field, okay? New ideas are emerging, new conceptions of leadership, There's a lot of space for contamination, for creativity. There's a lot of dialogue between disciplines. Leadership studies are being contaminated by the arts, by the humanities, by philosophy, by theater, by meditation, a lot of things. So it's a very interesting moment to think about leadership and to practice leadership. Okay. Then, how did I start getting interested in leadership? As I said, I was coming from a very different background. I had studied philosophy, theology, political science, and then I came to Harvard. I came to Harvard to study politics. And there at Harvard, at the Kennedy School, the Kennedy School is the school of government of Harvard. Okay, it's the school that trains future politicians, future public officials, public servants. At the Kennedy School, I had the privilege to be enrolled in a very special course that is called Exercising Leadership, the Politics of Change. I was very young. I didn't know anything about leadership. I didn't know anything about this course. I happened to find myself in it. And I discovered something quite crazy, quite unexpected. I discovered that this course was very experiential. Okay, it was not a theoretical course. It was very experiential. For an entire semester, 80 students from around the world were put in a classroom. Okay, and they were asked to come up with their own plan for their time together. Okay, so basically that was the challenge. What do we do here now? What do we have to do? How do we move forward? Do we have a goal? Who is setting the agenda? Okay, so the professors who for 35 years have been teaching this class are the two men that you can see there on the slide, Martin Linsky and Ronald Heifetz. I discovered that these two men were kind of gurus in the field of leadership. They are the inventors of what came to be known as adaptive leadership. Okay, adaptive leadership was not created in a laboratory. Adaptive leadership was created with the students. Over the years, working with the students, observing the students, reflecting on what was emerging in the classroom, these two men came to a very new and crazy, if you wish, idea about leadership. They put together a framework that kind of revolutionized the field of leadership studies, in my opinion. Let me show you what they came up with. They had the brilliant idea that leadership operates in any community, like adaptation does in biology. Okay, let me repeat that. So leadership serves the same function in any group, in any community, that adaptation, evolution serves for a biological species. Okay, so that is the function of leadership. The function of leadership is to renew the DNA of a group. The function of leadership is to renew the genetics of a group. Okay, and that group can be your family, your team, your company, your country, your municipality, your NGO, your church, your volleyball team, your group of friends, any human group. Okay, so you are starting to see what we said a moment ago. Okay, so leader, we don't use the word leader. In adaptive leadership, there's no such a word as leader. There's leadership as a practice, leadership as an activity. The activity that does precisely that. The activity that decides what parts of DNA are still working, okay, in the present, okay, and what parts of DNA don't work anymore. What parts of DNA have become outdated? What parts of DNA have become problematic? What parts of DNA are gonna slow us down moving towards the future? Okay, so on that slide, I've kind of represented what I'm talking about. This work of selection of DNA. What to keep, what parts of DNA to keep, what parts of DNA to discard, and what new things we need to learn in order to make more progress in the future. Okay, So that's the work of leadership. The work of leadership is to push your group to do this work. Anybody who does that, regardless of their role, regardless of their age, regardless of their title, anybody can do that. Anybody who does that is exercising leadership on a certain topic, for a certain group, in a certain moment in time. Okay? So leadership is that precise activity. This work, though, is very difficult work. This work is probably the most difficult work ever. Okay? Nobody has got a recipe to do this work. Doing this work takes time. Doing this work takes effort. This work is not natural. In the natural world out there, this happens naturally. In our groups, this does not happen naturally. Groups don't want to do this work. Groups want to preserve the status quo as much as they can. Okay? So whenever you push your group, a group you care a lot about, to do this work, they are going to complain about it. They're going to resist. They're going to resist. Okay? So Heifetz and Linsky, they say that, whenever you exercise leadership, don't expect to be followed. At the beginning, especially, don't expect to be followed. Don't expect gratitude. Expect resistance. Expect resistance. So here I'm saying something quite controversial. Okay, there's no followership in this model. Okay, when you exercise leadership, more often than not, you attract resistance. You attract resistance. Why? Because you are pushing people to confront loss. Okay? Adaptation requires loss. We said it a moment ago. Adaptation is a mix of conservation and loss. Conservation and loss. Some things are going to be preserved for the future. Some things are going to be left behind. Okay? And we as humans, all of us, we don't want to lose anything. We are conservative beings. We are conservative beings. We don't want to lose anything. We cling to our DNA. We cling to what we know. We cling to what we have created in the past. We cling to what has worked in the past. So when you push your people to think about what should be discarded, you are disturbing them. You are generating problems. Okay? So leadership, let me say this, leadership is not that much about solving problems. Leadership is about showing problems. This is quite controversial. Leadership is not that much about solving problems for others. It's more about showing others the problems they should focus on. Okay? Let me see. So, a few more things about adaptive leadership. Let me see how we're doing on time. So adaptive leadership was born at the Kennedy School, as I said. It's a school of politics. So adaptive leadership is a political framework. It's a political approach. This is very important. It was not born out of the business school. I'm quite proud to say that. At the Kennedy School, they try to prepare students to navigate complexity. So adaptive leadership doesn't diminish complexity. Adaptive leadership wants to prepare you to confront complexity and be more prepared for it. Leadership has to do with complexity. Leadership has to do with things that cannot be solved technically. This is another very important thing, There's a lot of confusion. We mix up leadership and management. Management is about technical problems. Leadership is about adaptive problems that cannot be solved by an expert. Experts are not enough to solve adaptive problems. Why? Because adaptive problems belong to the people who own them. If you hire an expert to solve an adaptive problem, you're wasting time and money. So the only way to make progress on an adaptive problem is to mobilize the people who own that problem, who should care about that problem. Okay? So leadership is community work. Leadership is group work. You, as an individual who want to exercise leadership, what can you do? Well, you can do your own part and mobilize others to do their own, right? Okay. So if we want to, start, crafting a new definition of leadership, well, a big component of this work, of this adaptive work, is reflection. Reflection. Way before action, leadership is about reflection. What are we confronted with? What are we facing? What are we facing? What are we doing? What are we not doing? What are we not seeing? Why are we not seeing what we should see? These questions are leadership questions, okay? And then, as we said, at the core of leadership work is to work with people's fears. Work with people's fears. Okay, so the most basic, the most essential definition of leadership for Heifetz and Linsky is the one you can see there on the slide. Manage people's fears of loss. Manage people's fears of loss. Connected with adaptation, caused by adaptation. Okay, adaptation causes losses. People don't want to lose. So leadership is all about doing something with those losses, doing something with those fears of loss, the fears of others and your own fears. Let's not forget that. So you see the two components of leadership: manage your own fears of loss and help others manage their own, right? So whoever wants to exercise leadership for their own community, professional, family, community, any kind of community that you belong to or that you care about, well, leadership is about facilitating adaptation for your community. Facilitating adaptation. What is adaptation? Well, adaptation is increasing the possibility for your community to thrive. Increasing the possibilities for your community to thrive, to live better. Again, another word that we borrow from biology. Increasing the possibilities for you and your people to thrive, right? Well, I hope here you can see the diagram. Some of us, like diagrams, some others not that much, but we try to make it, to simplify it. When we want to measure leadership, the two indicators that we put on this diagram, as you see here, on the horizontal, you see time, you see time, right? And on the vertical, you see disequilibrium, disequilibrium. We said at the very beginning, leadership is not about equilibrium. Leadership is about change. Leadership is about change, okay? Change to the status quo, change to the status quo, okay? So how do we track progress? How do we track leadership? Well, we measure the amount of disequilibrium that people can take. We measure the amount of disequilibrium that people can tolerate, okay? How much disequilibrium can me and my community tolerate in this moment in time? Look at the two curves. Look at the two curves, okay? A technical problem can be fixed with a recipe. A technical problem can be fixed with a recipe. When you hire an expert, you expect him or her to solve your problem in the shortest amount of time, causing the least disequilibrium, right? That's what you expect from an expert. And that's completely fine and yeah, absolutely fine. The work of leadership is exactly the opposite. The work of leadership is not about lowering disequilibrium. The work of leadership is about increasing the amount of disequilibrium that your people can take. Okay, you see the curve, the lighter curve here is going up. Especially at the beginning. The work of leadership is about turning up the temperature. Okay, any group prefers to stay in a comfort zone, right? Leadership is about pushing yourself and others to exit a comfort zone. Exit a comfort zone. Okay. So, what's the ideal terrain of leadership? What's the ideal, terrain of leadership? You can see there, that gray area. That gray area, right? We call that area productive zone of disequilibrium. Productive zone of disequilibrium. I know it takes a while to process it. It's an oxymoron, right? It's an oxymoron. It's an area in which adaptive work is happening. Is an area in which adaptive work is happening. In that area, people are learning something new about themselves, about others, about the environment, about what is working, what is not working, about problems, right? Productive zone of disequilibrium. People don't want to stay in that area, right? Nobody wants to do that. We all want to go back to comfort as soon as possible, right? So leadership is about pushing people to that area and keeping myself and others in that area as often and as long as possible, right? Right? Above that area, there is a burnout zone. Burnout zone, okay? The burnout zone is an area in which people are exhausted. People cannot take it anymore. People are not working. People are exploding, right? So that area is to be avoided. So the work of leadership, we can sum it up. The work of leadership is about measuring constantly how much heat, how much disequilibrium can we tolerate, right? Around a certain problem, around a certain topic, okay? And then operate, and then work on that, with that. Okay, so leadership is about measuring. Leadership is about measuring. Leadership is about measuring. And you see how much time it takes. You see how much time it takes, okay? Technical problems can be solved quickly. Adaptive problems take time to emerge. People don't want to see them. People don't want to see them, right? So don't expect to solve adaptive problems quickly, right? Just a word about this. Adaptive leadership is very clear on the distinction between authority and leadership. We often use these two words interchangeably as if they were two synonyms. They are not. They are not. Okay? Authority is a role. Authority is a role. Authority is given to you. If you're a teacher, if you're a parent, if you are a mayor, if you are, the prime minister of Italy, that is a role of authority that is given to you. In that role, you are expected to deliver. You are expected to deliver. You're expected to solve problems for others. You're expected to guide others. And that's completely fine. You're paid to do that, right? Leadership is not that. Leadership is not required by anybody. Leadership is something you have to take for yourself. As we said a moment ago, at the beginning and throughout the process, you're going to receive resistance. People will resist, will push back to your action of leadership. Okay, so we could spend a lot of time talking about the tension between authority and leadership. Okay, authority is about solving problems as quickly as possible. Leadership is about innovation. Leadership is about innovation. Okay, how do you reconcile those two things? How do you reconcile those two things? That's why managers are in a particularly tricky position. Managers are in a particularly tricky position. They are required to deliver solutions, quick solutions, but at the same time, leadership is requiring them to stop, rethink, question, help others to question. So how do you combine those two things? That's the biggest question of all. How do you combine authority and leadership? And believe me, that question is not only for managers, that question is with us since we are teenagers. I'm going to talk in a second more about the work we do with groups. That tension starts when you are a teenager or even a child. I don't know. That is the tension between expectations on one hand, and aspirations. Expectations and aspirations. Expectations meaning the things that you have to do to please others, your boss, your mother, your friends, your community, and aspirations, which is your contribution. Your contribution. Often those two things are not in line. Often those two things are in tension. Okay, the things you have to do and the things you feel you want to do, right?
Sorry, Stefano, to interrupt you. Just wanted to ask you if it would be possible to take another maybe 5 minutes for finishing the presentation.
Sure.
It would be perfect for us in order to have time for the Q&A.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much.
We're coming to the only part. I just wanted to give you, a very quick, because, as I said a moment ago, it takes an entire semester at Harvard to go into the details of adaptive leadership. Here we are saying things that are quite different than the usual on leadership, but we are trying to be quick. So how do you apply these ideas? How do you apply these ideas? These ideas are relevant to anybody in any position, anywhere, I believe. I'm firmly convinced of that. The way I found to work with these ideas has a lot to do with my biography. I was born in a town, Ivrea, which is in the province of Torino, the province of Turin, in northern Italy, which nowadays it's a small town, 25,000 people. A few decades ago, this place was quite special. Why? Because it was the headquarters of the Olivetti company. The Olivetti company became famous around the world for leading on many issues, not only technology innovation, product innovation, design, but also social issues. The Olivetti company, under the guidance of Adriano Olivetti, found a way to combine profit and social innovation. So that was quite remarkable. In 2018, UNESCO, the UN body, the UN agency, recognized the contribution of Olivetti to humanity. And so in 2018, the town of Ivrea became a UNESCO site. Okay, so when I came back from Harvard to Italy, and I really felt that I wanted to work with these adaptive leadership ideas, because I thought that Italy needed these ideas a lot. Well, I decided to create an institute, a school for these ideas, and we decided to create this school in Ivrea, precisely in Ivrea, in a very special building. The building which used to be the library of the Olivetti company. So in that building, people, workers, anybody could go and get tools to exercise leadership, we could say. So Adriano Olivetti thought that anybody could contribute to the adaptation of their own community. Okay, so that place, the building, the very beautiful and special building that we inhabit today, was a learning center. In a word, we could say that leadership is about learning. Learning more about your community and helping your community to learn. So that is us in the building. That is the translation of the book that I did 5 years ago, my Ronald Heifetz and Marty Linsky's book. And that is the building, you see, the building that we inhabit. It's a very special building. It's a building that really combines crazy architecture, as you can see, with nature. Crazy architecture and nature. Nature is built within the building. You see the trees going through. There is a lot of symbology behind that. There is a lot of symbology. So what we do with the institute is to bring life back into this building. Okay, so this building that was abandoned for a long time now is alive again. So now there is people of all ages, of all backgrounds, coming to the building to learn about leadership, to experiment what it means to exercise leadership. Okay, what it means, to live the tension between their own authority and their own exercise of leadership. Here you can see some pictures. Last year we had a very beautiful school for young girls. It's just an example. For 8 months, young girls came to the school to learn about themselves, to learn about their role in the world, to learn about how to exercise more leadership and how not to get hurt too much. And that's particularly important for girls and women, right? So we can say that the Institute, locally, in Ivrea and nationally, is trying to cultivate a leadership community. So a leadership that becomes better at seeing its own problems and working through those problems. That is adaptation for us. That is the work of leadership for us. So the Institute works with all sorts of communities, as we said at the beginning. Youth, and that's particularly important for us, youth, high schoolers, university students, and then we work with public administrations, small companies, large companies, public officials, politics, NGOs, associations, and citizens. Too often leadership is relegated to the managerial world. For us, leadership needs to be brought back to the community. Anybody can exercise leadership. People need to learn how to do that. Learn frameworks, skills, language to become better at making progress on adaptive challenges. That is our mission, which is quite ambitious, but is very concrete. I'm going to stop here, and we have time for some questions and reflections with you.
Thank you so much, Stefano. It was incredibly interesting and motivating. And now I would like to leave the floor to my colleague that is going to direct the Q&A section of this IULM Flow. So yeah, I will invite also the people that asked the question to come over.
Also for me, thank you so much, Stefano, for the entire presentation. Everything was so interesting, lovely to learn about everything, also very brand new for me. So yeah, as Sophia said, we're now going to start with the Q&A session. And first I have Diana. She's going to ask some questions which came from another student, which unfortunately couldn't make it. But we still want to ask these questions, of course. So. Okay. Can you see the presentation again?
Yeah. Okay, I'm Diana, and I will be reading the questions on behalf of Corsi Bruna because she could not attend at this time. So the first one she wanted to ask is, how does the Adriano Olivetti Leadership Institute approach leadership development, and what are some of the key principles that guide its programs and initiatives?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think I said a few things about that. Accessibility. So we try to find ways for as many people as possible to access these ideas. Some people can pay for it. A lot of people cannot. So we try to find sponsors, partners who can support our programs for youth, for women, for citizens, for teachers, for medical professionals, people who cannot pay for training. But we believe that these groups need these ideas more than ever, especially now. Coming out of the pandemic, a lot of uncertainty, a lot of adaptive challenges all around us. If more and more people become skilled or more skilled at doing something on these adaptive challenges, the societal impact that could come out of that could be big. And we didn't come up with this idea. We look at another center in the US, in Kansas, the Kansas Leadership Center. They've been doing this work for 15 years. Okay, so they got a lot of money, a big donation to do precisely that. The donor said, go out there and bring these ideas to as many people as you can. And that's what they've been doing for 15 years. The level of engagement of people, the level of ownership of problems has increased in Kansas exponentially. So we really believe in that. We really believe that it's possible.
Okay, thank you. And just one more question. Can you share any success stories or examples of leaders that have been through the programs offered by your institute and eventually have gone on to make a positive impact in their communities?
Yeah, absolutely. As I said, we need to be really careful in using the word leader. It's tricky. Nobody's a leader all the time on every problem in every group they belong to. We exercise leadership on things that we care about. Leadership is something episodic. It's something that you exercise now and then you stop and then you start again, right? The more people exercise leadership in a group, the more the more problems get progressed and solved, right? So let's be very careful in using the word leader. I already talked about the young women that we worked with for 8 months last year. I mean, for me, those young women were incredible. They came in immediately after the pandemic, and they found it very difficult to open up with us, with the other girls in the group. But when we started sharing this vocabulary, with them, it was incredible. They opened up like flowers, and the capacity of the group to focus, to to get deep into problems, to develop muscles, to do this work was incredible. And those were just teenagers. Imagine if people were more used to doing this work. So I always bring the example of those women, of those young women, because they were really impressive.
Thanks so much, Stefano. We have one problem we need to resolve because we cannot play the slide. That's why I give 1 minute because there are also other questions.
Yeah, exactly. So actually, Stefano, I had a quick question for myself. You mentioned a lot to do with human biography and leadership, but I always thought that sort of also human nature, sort of to follow something or follow a leader, or in that kind of sense. How do you see that way?
Human biology?
Yeah, sort of, because well, it's a bad example. It's not a bad example. That's an example. I remember even with the Second World War, of course, when how quickly people followed behind a leader. And I remember they also made a movie sort of to showcase that it's actually possible in a society like this. What
Right.
do you know any of that?
Sure. Again, it's all a problem of language. We are too used. We use leadership, the word leader, the word leadership in an incorrect sense. All right. So leadership is not about guiding a group, right? Leadership is about helping a group become better at seeing its own problems and doing something about them. So in that sense, when we say, I don't know, Hitler or Mussolini or whoever, they were leaders. They were not. In no way they were leaders, because they did not do that. They did not help their people see their problems and do something about them. They found scapegoats. They found easy ways around problems. You see, so they did
Yes.
They did exactly the opposite of exercising leadership. They did not exercise leadership. So we should really be careful about that. Leadership is a muscle. Like any other muscle that you train in the gym. Very often people don't know they have it. They don't know they have it until they discover it, until they find out. Okay. If you don't train a muscle for a long time, it doesn't grow. It kind of grows
Okay,
back.
thank you very much. Thank you so much, Stefano. I will now give the next question is from Greta.
Hi, thank you so much for being here with us today. So My question is more of a technical question because next year many of us will leave IULM and go to do our masters and stuff. And many of the masters that are proposed today at universities are focused on leadership. So my question is, as I said, more of a technical questions, and I know that you are the co-founder of Youth Leadership Camp, and that would be me. That joined the Olivetti Leadership Institute at the Youth Leadership Camp, but I know it's for teens. So my technical question, sorry for the buffering, is how what should we do now? What should we do now for our careers to become leaders, to exercise this kind of leadership?
Thank you, Greta. Well, thank you for the bricolage there, which is very nice. That's a very important question. I would say study as much as you can, at as many subjects as you can. So a person who exercises leadership is a person that is able to bring ideas from outside, from outside a group, connect ideas, bring new points of view. Okay, bring ideas that might seem a bit uncomfortable at the beginning, but then they provoke people. They provoke people to rethink who they are, what they do, etc. There is a lot of need for those figures anywhere in the world. Okay, we are in a moment when the status quo, the status quo is leaking. The status quo is leaking in many places, in many communities. So there is need for people who have the courage, to say this, to talk about this, to help their people see what is not working for them. Okay, and more and more companies are actually hiring people to do precisely that. Sustainability manager, innovation manager. Those are all people that when they are allowed to do their job, they do precisely that. They help a group, they help a company renew their DNA, renew who they are. Okay, separate the things that work from the things that don't work anymore. And those jobs are extremely important, more and more important. And I think that there's going to be a greater need for those profiles. So I think you guys, you are in a better position than others to do precisely that. Because you have been exposed. You've been exposed.
Thank you so much.
Ideas.
Your perspective was very, very enlightening, especially with your background. Thank you so much. I leave the floor to the other people. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Greta. Next, I have a question from Valera Amorosa. So, I'm sorry.
Hello. First of all, thank you again for being here. I had initially 3 questions, but I think I already know the answer to the second one.
Mm-hmm.
When you talk about adapting and change, you kind of answered about how flexible you think leadership should be. But I was wondering, how do you balance the need for stability with the need of innovation, since today we always talk about innovation and progress. But more specifically, how do you personally show this flexibility in your leadership role?
Thank you so much. I mean, this question is really central to what we are talking about here. So, I mean, you are very ahead. And the work of leadership is precisely that: finding a constant balance between stability and innovation, as you said, loss and conservation, renewal and conservation. Adaptation is precisely that, a balance between those 2 things, which is very, very difficult. There's no recipe. Everybody has got a different idea about the percentages. So what the most important skill to develop in leadership is empathy. Go around and ask people, how are you doing? How How are you tolerating what we're doing? Are you tolerating what we're doing? Can we do more? Or should we turn it down a little bit? Don't forget the diagram, time and disequilibrium, time and disequilibrium. How do you know? Well, you have to ask. You have to make experiments. There's no recipe, there's no manual. There's no manual for leadership, okay? Leadership is all about making experiments with your own people. Be careful here, though. People do get hurt. People do get hurt, So how
I
do
agree.
we make progress without hurting people, without leaving victims on the ground? That is very important, okay? So how do we protect our own people, ourselves and others while we do this work? So, leadership it's a mix of protection and exposure, exposing people to the things they should do and see, while at the same time protecting them. So, I don't have an answer. I'm just saying, be careful and measure constantly. And the first person you have to protect is yourself, okay? Because, when you overdo it, very likely you're going to be burnt. You're going to be burnt by resistance, by pushback, by overwork. So, yeah, how to exercise leadership and survive. That's a good. It's a very important topic.
Thank you so much. I really agree with you, actually. So I really like to answer. You answered perfectly. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Valeria. Next, we have the question of Valeria. Do you know?
Good afternoon. My name is Valeria. First of all, thank you very much for your interesting presentation. So initially, my question was if you think that leadership is something you are born with or that can be developed, but you actually kind of answered to my question at the beginning, saying that in the past it was more believed as a personal characteristic, but now it's more seen as a practice that can be evolved. So now my question is, what is your opinion on this, and which strategy can be effective to train people for leadership and help them to overcome the resistance?
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. Well, I think that there's no other way. The experiential way is the only way. What we try to recreate in our classrooms is precisely that. It's an experience of uncertainty. What do people do in uncertainty? Do they find easy? Do they look for easy answers? Do they look for shortcuts? Do they look up to the authority figures to give them ready answers, or are they willing to work? Are they willing to do their part? Okay. And I'm sorry to say, most people in Italy, in the US, in China, anywhere, most people, if they can, they choose the former. They choose the former. So how do you show people that the second is the only possible way? Because if you look, if you rely on experts, maybe one time, two times, you're lucky. But what if you're not lucky? What if experts go crazy? What if experts have bad intentions? What if experts get it wrong? What if your leaders, quote unquote, take you to war?
Of course.
Yes. So that is, there's no other way. You have to show people that adaptive challenges can only be solved when people start working on them.
Of course. Yeah. Thank you.
It's a very personal work as well. And as we said, it starts when you are a teenager. The tension between expectations and aspirations. So the sooner people start, confronting that tension, the more chances there are that they will exercise leadership later in life.
Okay, thank you. Actually, at the beginning, I thought it was a personal characteristic. And so listening to your speech today really enlightened me. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Valeria. We also had some last minute questions coming. So.
Hi, I'm Gaia. So my question is not on the slides, but it came to my mind during your presentation. And so since leadership is defined as the ability to manage people's fear of loss, what are leadership's ethical implications? What about when leadership turns into manipulation or similar concepts?
Yeah,
That's a big
question. Great question. Great question. In adaptive leadership, there's no bad leadership. There's leadership and there is the absence of leadership. Okay, manipulation is not leadership. Manipulation is a bad use of authority. A bad use of authority. Leadership is about the opposite. Leadership is about empowerment of others. It's about mobilization of others. You see, when leadership is not in one person, the risk of manipulation it's lower. The risk of manipulation is lower. Okay, so that's my answer to that. So leadership is all about facilitating the ability of others to do their own part for a problem in a certain situation. So manipulation is an easy way out, but as I said during my presentation, let's not forget that authority is given to you. So let's be very careful when we give authority to somebody. They can use it in ways that we might not like. Leadership is not given. Leadership is not taken. Leadership is exercised. So authority is given and taken. Leadership is exercised. Is a contribution. So so leadership it's more about free experimentation. Okay, it's more dangerous, but it's freer.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. And now we have our last question. Please join me on stage.
Hello. Hi. So you previously talked about authority and leadership. So my question for you is, do you think that competence, so actually having the knowledge and the skills necessary to cover a certain role, a necessity in order to be a leader, or anyone can be a leader in any situation, any context?
Guys, I'm very happy with these questions. I'm not saying it to please you, but you are more ahead than some of managers that we work with. So I'm very pleased about that. It's a very tricky question. Competence is very important. Knowledge is very important, but it's not everything. Sometimes competence on a certain topic prevents you from experimenting. We see that all the time. People who think they're very competent on something, they're not willing to lose their face. They're not willing to experiment at the border. Okay, leadership requires you to experiment, to make experiments at the border between what you know and what you don't know, what you have already tried and what you haven't tried. Let's be very careful with competence. Competence is absolutely needed to solve technical problems or to solve the technical components of problems, but it cannot solve completely adaptive problems. Adaptive problems can only be solved with experimentation, because the solutions to adaptive problems have not been tried out yet. Think about climate change. No expert can solve climate change for us. They can do their part, of course, but until people, start realizing that that climate change is their own problem, governments, people, anybody, very little progress can be made on it. So you see the two components, technical and adaptive. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. The reason why I asked you about competence is also because one of my doubts was, do you need to be recognized as a leader in order to act as a leader? So, of course, with competence comes also recognition by your peers. by your peers. So that was why I nominated competence in the previous question.
Yeah, another wonderful question. No, especially at the beginning, at point zero, very often leadership is not recognized. Very often when you exercise leadership, people push back, resist you because you are disturbing them, okay? So while authority and competence are, recognized, and you have to do everything you can to to keep that level of competence. With leadership, it's something different. When you exercise leadership, you are constantly at the frontier. You are on the edge between your comfort zone, your competence zone, your authority, your sphere of authority, and what is outside. We often prefer to stay inside because at least we know what to do, right? It might not be ideal, but we know what to do. When you make a step out, you might lose something: your sense of competence, your authority, allies, friends, right? So that's the tension. But adaptive challenges can only be solved by doing that. So
okay, perfect. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll welcome back my colleague, Sophia. Then we have come to the end of the Q&A, and I want to say thank you, Stefano, for everything, for your presentation, for your knowledge, for answering our questions, of course. Thank you for this amazing experience.
Maybe Lorenzo, our technical assistant, if you could remove the slide so that we can say goodbye to Lorenzo in full screen. And yeah, we have finished with our Q&A and our presentation.
Thank you so much, guys. It was really a pleasure, and I really encourage you to go out there and try. Go out there and try. But always keep in mind that it's a risky activity, so you should be really careful and find allies and find people that can support you while you do this. I'm not sure that we're still on.